What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
I see dead people.
All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby is part of the critical conversations currently taking place across the film community. The podcast reaches out to the next generation of filmmakers who continue to look for inspiration and guidance. Remember to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment in the comments section. Share the podcast with friends and family, and have a great day. And now, over to the host of the show, Damian Swaby.
Topher, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. You're here on the podcast. I've got a brilliant cinematographer like yourself to talk to. What more could I want?
That's too sweet. And but thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
How did you get your start as a cinematographer in the industry?
Sure. I was living up in San Francisco, just finishing up undergrad in media studies, which sounds like a kind of a film discipline, but media studies at University of San Francisco was a bit more of like kind of media theory and criticism, more of a like Noam Chomsky kind of a discipline. I was just kind of coming to the end of that. And then one of my professors just happened to show us a film he just made, which was nominated for an Oscar. So it was called The Weather Underground. It was a documentary. I can't remember what year that was. I think it might have been 2004. But it was up against Errol Morris's Fog of War for Best Documentary. Yeah, so he showed us that film, and it just kind of like that. I mean, it's funny because, at that point I was like, I guess must have been about 22 years old. I'd never even considered, filmmaking as a career or even as a hobby. But I just, watching his film at the same time while meeting someone who made the film, everything just kind of struck me in this way where I realized like, oh, there's like a whole career that is filmmaking that I never even considered for myself. So at that point, I just started to kind of just dive really deep into, cinematography and just film viewing. And I suddenly had it in my head that I wanted to be a cinematographer. And so I approached that same professor, his name's Sam Green, and he introduced me to his DP, Andy Black, who is a local in San Francisco. Met with him, and then basically just got my start just assisting Andy on documentary shoots. And I mean, from there, just got more and more into it. I was still in school at this point. Our school had kind of a journalism emphasis. And there were a lot of students who were just kind of shooting their own documentaries that I discovered. So from there, I just kind of decided, that I wanted to start shooting for other people, and pretty much anyone who would let me shoot for them. I just kind of, started calling myself the cinematographer of the school. And that actually worked out pretty well because I don't think at that time, there was no one else in my program doing the same thing. So I got to shoot a lot of, student work and just cut my teeth and just learn a ton, just kind of shooting short documentaries. And then, from there, kind of just went into the workforce after school for a little bit, also while trying to freelance at the same time. So I was kind of trying to freelance in San Francisco, but it's a really difficult city to get started in, I will say. And I ended up getting a 9-to-5 at a small financial company. And then eventually just decided, I want to just pursue the film thing, full time. So I applied to go to UCLA grad school for the MFA in cinematography, and then moved to LA, and the rest is history. Just kind of came down here to go to UCLA and then got my start that way.
Why is San Francisco a difficult place to get your start in? And when you worked at the financial company 9-to-5, were you a video producer there or a videographer or?
No, I was creating like a kind of like internal like marketing material, and doing like it was pretty, honestly, it was kind of dull work at the time. I was just at some point I realized I needed to make a living, and I wasn't really paying the bills doing the freelance cinematography thing. I think it's just, I mean, it was probably a combination of like, it's hard to get your start in any city. At that time, I didn't really know that. I'm coming out of school just wanting to work. So it was difficult to, find people to pay me. And I might have blamed some stuff on San Francisco, but then also it's also just like a big corporate video town. Like there's just not a lot of opportunity up there for people to kind of like work their way into the film industry and specifically into camera department. Like whenever they are shooting up there, it's either very, very, very independent stuff, which at that time, from what I could tell, was kind of a tight knit community, mostly out of San Francisco State, which was a different school, and I didn't really know anybody there. Or people would be shooting commercials up there, but a lot of times they were bringing the crew up from LA, at least at that time. And yeah, I just found it just difficult to kind of like get a start. But there were a lot of very small budget documentaries being shot, and at the same time, I think I got a lot of opportunities up there in terms of like building my reel and gaining experience, just because it is such a small community, and I was able to kind of get my foot in on some very very small projects. But I think at the time that was exactly what I needed, and it was just a great place for me to learn while also holding down a 9-to-5 job. So I think it worked out, and then I kind of outgrew it a little bit.
And what type of things did you learn in film school as a cinematographer?
Well, film school, yeah, I mean, so UCLA, I think it's changed a bit over the years, but at that time it was a very small program. So they would admit 3 DPs and 18 directors every year. So there's a class of 21 in the production program. And so the first year we're kind of all treated as directors. So, I just learned a lot about filmmaking that I didn't know, which was great for me. I think UCLA, like one thing that was really cool about that program is that they don't necessarily bring in people who've made films or have any experience in film. Like they like bringing in a variety of people, many of which who have zero experience in film. And so I was one of those people. So that was kind of perfect for me to go into that program and take like a 1 year of just like film school essentially. And then starting in the second year, it was really great because with only 3 DPs and 18 directors, you just end up shooting so much. Like I feel like I was just constantly going from short film to short film to short film. And it was also really nice because the directors take up a lot of the, they pick up a lot of like the crewing work. Because I know in a lot of other cinematography programs, the DPs end up having, to crew for each other, which is great. And I definitely did quite a bit of crewing in film school. But what was great about that program is I think I just spent so much more time just shooting and just kind of learning on my feet as the DP. And by the time I got out, after 3 years of that, I think I just felt confident enough to just kind of go right in and, just start like only DPing. So
That's brilliant.
So after that, I kind of worked my way back into documentary because, again, it felt like, especially when you're coming out of film school, and at least for me, it felt like getting opportunities to be the DP on a project. It was either going to be really small budget shorts or, documentary. And I kind of worked my way into the documentary side of things when I first got out. And I think that worked out. I really enjoyed it, and I still love working on documentaries. So,
what type of documentaries do you love working on, and what type of documentaries have you worked on that we might see?
So pretty soon out of film school, I got an opportunity to go shoot a documentary in Ghana with a director who, it's funny, like, it's so funny how a lot of these relationships work out, at least for me when I was kind of coming out of film school. This director had emailed me because he showed up at one of our film screenings. I never even met him in person, but he'd emailed me and, told me that he loved my film and he would love to work with me one day. And so I emailed him back, and then, that was pretty much it. I just thanked him and, told him like, let's stay in touch. And then maybe like 4 or 5 months later, hadn't heard from him. Things were really slow. And then, so I just shot him an email and just like, want to see what he was up to. he immediately called me. His name's Jareth Mertz. Immediately called me, told me he was getting ready to go to Western Africa for 3 months to shoot a documentary, and that he decided he wanted to bring a DP. And like, I feel like a week later I was on an airplane.
Amazing.
And then I was there for, I think originally it was going to be maybe 2 month shoot, but then it turned into a 3 month shoot, and we were there over Christmas vacation. So it ended up being a pretty long shoot, but it was just, I mean, it was amazing. It was like, it was amazing coming out of film school and having a job. So that was great. But then just the experience itself, like, it's probably one of the most memorable shoots I've done. And then coming off of that, it definitely opened up some opportunities. Like, the film ended up getting into Sundance, and it was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award, and it did, I think, pretty well for a first documentary film. So. And
after doing a documentary like that, how did you start to get into narrative films? How did you start to use your cinematography in a different way?
So after that, I mean, I always, like, my contacts from film school were all narrative based for the most part. So, after that, came back and then kind of continued, shooting short narratives. I didn't really have any like feature opportunities coming my way. But I did meet a commercial producer shortly after that. And I decided, this was like, so this would have been and when I say after that, I mean after the film came out, which is where I was kind of able to use that opportunity to get some other jobs. And so around 2011, I feel like, just in terms of branded content, like documentary style branded and documentary style commercials were like kind of becoming very, very trendy at the time. Okay. So I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe I could use my documentary experience to kind of work something and, find a way into commercials, which was always a goal of mine. Like, I've always, like, even before film school, I just always thought it would be fun to work on commercials, like not so much the corporate video stuff up in San Francisco, but proper commercials. And so, yeah, there was just a lot of these smaller production companies popping up around LA that were doing a lot of kind of documentary style branded content. And, after kind of pounding the pavement for a little bit and trying to get my, reel out there, I managed to get some of those gigs. And then unfortunately, those led to some bigger ones. And then I was kind of able to kind of then steer out of the documentary only style, ad work, and then get more into like narrative ad work, which I also really love doing. So, yeah.
And from all of that experience that you have and all of those projects that you worked on, how did you then go on to work on Dear White People?
Yeah. So when you say Dear White People, you're talking about like the whole project.
Yeah.
So I first got involved with that. So actually, yeah, one thing just kind of led to another, right? Because then I was doing the kind of like branded documentary style stuff, but also shooting shorts. So then one day, Justin Simien, creator of Dear White People, reached out to me. So he was working at Participant Media, doing kind of like content creation. I can't remember what his exact role was. But he reached out. He was a producer over there, and they had kind of like a web arm called Take Part. I don't know if that still exists, but it was kind of a YouTube channel for Participant. And what they would do is they'd create content that was kind of like in theme with a Participant Media movie that was coming out. So at that time, Best Western Marigold Hotel, I think is the title of that film, was coming out. I haven't actually seen the film, but so the film is about, people kind of in their later stage of life, I guess, deciding to do something totally different. And so Justin approached me through Take Part, wanting to, he was putting together some short documentaries, one in Boston, one in Seattle, and then one in LA, where we would shoot, just like a short 5-minute story that would play on Take Part and kind of was connected to the film Best Western Marigold Hotel. So he and I met. It's funny, like thinking back, I think this was back in like 2011. He and I met in a coffee bean. Okay. He told me about those projects. I was super pumped about, doing those projects because travel short documentary, with the paycheck sounded awesome to me at that time. And then as soon as our meeting was, almost done, he then was kind of also like, oh, by the way, he told me that he'd seen this short film that I shot a couple years prior. It was called Kiss Me, directed by Jules Nourish. I actually really love the film and that project. And also Jules is an amazing filmmaker. So he'd seen that and wanted me to shoot a trailer for a movie that he had written. And so, gave me the script. He told me it was called Dear White People. Now, here's a funny story. I've only told maybe like a handful of people this story, but why not tell it on your podcast?
Yeah, that's the spirit.
So this was like coffee bean at like, it was like 5 p.m. on a Thursday. And for whatever reason, and we're like right there, intersection of, I want to say like San Vicente and Wilshire. It's a pretty big like 5-way intersection in kind of midtown LA. And it was just super loud. And the volume just kicked up, and the coffee, the milk frothers were in full blast. So he's telling me about this project, and I honestly could barely hear him. And it was kind of like the end of our meeting. And he said it was called Dear White People, but I think what I heard was like Dear something people. And I like immediately thought it was like a horror film about people who were like half deer, half human.
Okay.
And so I was kind of like, trying to, it's like it had already been kind of a long meeting. I was kind of smiling and nodding, not totally understanding what the project was about, but our meeting was coming to an end. And I was like, I can't wait to read the script, thinking it was going to be kind of like this crazy, like low budget horror.
Yeah.
And then I went home and read it. And then, of course, I was just blown away. I mean, Justin's an amazing writer. The material just immediately spoke to me. And, I think I just immediately either called or emailed him and was like, dude, this is something that is so amazing, and I would love to be a part of it. And, thank you for even considering me. And so, from there, we went and shot a concept trailer. This happened like months later. We shot like a micro budget concept trailer, which was all pretty much like guerrilla shooting. We shot UCLA without permits. We shot, friends' houses. I want to say it was a 3-day shoot, might have been a 2-day shoot, but it was just one of those like never ending, kind of like small micro budget shoots with many company moves. So we did that, and then that trailer ended up kind of taking off. I remember Justin was like interviewed on, I want to say it was CNN. I'm pretty sure it was CNN. And then, the project just kind of like got legs. I mean, it still took a while, I think, like any project, to like take off and, get the funding that it needed, but eventually it did. And and then we shot the feature film out in Minneapolis, I want to say like 2 years later.
What is it that exactly attracted you to the script? What is it about Dear White People that made you think, I really want to shoot this?
So, the material itself, I think, is fantastic, but more than anything, honestly, I just love Justin's writing. Like when I read something that he's written, I find it so easy to read. I love all the back and forth. I love that it was a satire. It was just like so much fun. It was also a project that I had not seen on screen before. So that's always really refreshing when you're, especially as a filmmaker, getting his or her start. I feel like a lot of times you're getting scripts where, they feel like they're maybe not that great and maybe kind of not that original. So in this case, it was great and original. And I was just super excited to get to take a shot at it. So.
And when you prep for a show like Dear White People, how do you prep for a show like that? What are the type of things you're keeping in consideration?
So, and when you say, are you talking about the current TV show, or are you still talking about the movies?
TV show, sorry.
Yeah. So, so we did the film, right? And then that, it did well. It went to Sundance. It got a lot of attention, and, it did pretty great. I think he won, I can't remember the name of the award he won, but he won an award for it. I think it was like best, new, I can't remember. I should probably look that up, and maybe you can edit that in later. But it did well. And, but after that, it started to become apparent that it was going to be turned into a television show. So I remember after that project, Justin and I kind of having our like talk down, we met for beers. He was telling me that it was going to become a TV show. And, you know, it seemed like he still really wanted me involved, and I obviously still wanted to be involved. And then so by the time the show came around, you know, it was kind of time for all that to take place. But then unfortunately, which, you know, I feel like this is just the way it works a lot of times. I didn't have any experience in narrative television. And so I interviewed with, who was that? Lionsgate. Interviewed with Lionsgate, and then and they're the like production company of the TV show, and essentially didn't get the job. So Justin definitely put up a fight for me, but you know, at the end of the day, it's like he'd never been a showrunner, he'd never created a show, I'd never shot a show. You know, they wanted to pair him up with someone with more experience. So with that said, I didn't shoot season 1. Jeffrey Waldron got the job, and Jeffrey, who I now know is an awesome cinematographer. I'm so happy that he did, because I think he did a great job at kind of maintaining the look that we created in the trailer and the movie. I think season 1 looks great. And then B, at the end of the day, even at that time, I thought I really wanted the job. Now looking back at it, I'm kind of like, I don't think I was ready for that job at all. And actually like walking into, so eventually I got the job on season 2. And what happened is Jeffrey, I think, you know, took another project that conflicted with Dear White People. And so suddenly I was kind of back in the hat in terms of people they were looking at, interviewed again. And then, you know, I think also at this time, like Justin had a lot more clout because he'd done it for a season. And so he was kind of able to get me in there, which, you know, I'm so grateful for getting that opportunity. But with that said, it was nice to come in season 2 and kind of like they'd kind of already figured everything out in terms of how it was going to work. They were shooting and we're still shooting there. It's a very small stage, kind of like in the edge of the valley. It's essentially a big warehouse that I want to say Lionsgate might own. I think they own it. And they just, at that time, they were just shooting 2 shows there, Dear White People, and then another show called Casual. And those 2 shows were just kind of flipping back and forth. And the build for each show would pretty much take up the entire stage. And it's just kind of a funky space. It wasn't necessarily like a traditional soundstage. So they had to come up with a lot of like creative ways to kind of make things work in terms of the rigging and the lighting and all that stuff. So coming in season 2 and kind of like basically walking into what they'd kind of already, a lot of the problems that they'd already solved, I think was really good for me at that time, because I don't know if I would have been able to figure it out, because I do think you do need, especially in a situation like that, a certain amount of experience to kind of go in and, you know, just to at least know like, all right, well, here's how we normally do it, and here's how we're going to have to do it, and, you know, what's the kind of like happy medium between those things to make this very weird, you know, stage work for us. But now we do make it work for us. In season 2, I think it turned out great, and I'm super thrilled with season 3. So it's been a lot of fun. And as far as like, sorry, I feel like I totally went off track. As far as like,
no, not at all.
So as far as what is it like prepping for that show? You know, I mean, in like my prep, a lot of it is really just working with my my gaffer, my rigging gaffer, my key grip, you know, and just kind of figuring out basically just trying to solve all the problems that could be thrown our way. That's kind of how I looked at it. Like that's a show that we shoot. So each episode is, I feel like they're usually over 30 pages. I want to say they're like 33 pages, and we're shooting each episode in 5 days. So, you know, when you break that down, I don't know, I guess it's like 6 and change pages per day. And then with only 1 location day at the end of the week, we're back at UCLA, which is really funny because that's where, you know, we kind of stole the location to do the original concept trailer. So I love the fact that we're shooting all of our exteriors at UCLA. Right. But there ends up being some like really high page count days. And so to me, you know, figuring out how to sometimes tackle 8 or 9 pages in a day. So to answer your question, how do I prep for that show? I mean, it's kind of like, I just feel like we're just trying to come up with any scenario that might be thrown our way, and we just want to be ready for it in terms of the pre-rig, or in terms of, you know, how we're going to need to light the stage. And the more prepared we can be ahead of time with that pre-rig, the faster we're going to be able to work. So, you know, there's that. And then there's the creative prep that I do with Justin. And then also, you know, I think just the standard stuff, working with our production designer and basically just trying to kind of, you know, figure out what's going to work really well, and also trying to find those things that might not work so well, whether it be like a certain color of the set, or, you know, maybe it's a certain transparency of the windows, whatever it is. So just basically trying to solve as many problems ahead of time as I can is kind of how I see prepping for that show, which is actually a lot of fun. And we get, you know, the rigging crew gets, I want to say they get like 6 or 7 weeks, and I'm in there for about 4 weeks.
Okay.
Trying to put out as many advanced fires as possible. So
you said earlier that you felt you wasn't ready to film a series, but judging your work beforehand and judging Dear White People, the movie, I'm quite surprised. And I'm also quite surprised that they said you weren't ready, yet the series looks completely like the film.
Well, I think it was just more, I mean, it's not so much that, you know, like in terms of like the visuals, but I think it's just in terms of working at a much faster pace of a TV show. Like, I think that was the big, you know, concern. I mean, it's essentially executives who, you know, they're hedging bets and they want to make sure, you know, that everything's going to go as smoothly as they can. And I just think that, I just feel like that's kind of like across the board. It's like, to give you an example, one time a producer friend of mine reached out to do second unit on a Starbucks commercial. I think it was Starbucks. And, you know, and it like seemed like I had the job. And then like 2 days before, he writes me and he's like, "Oh, do you have any pour shots?" And I read it back. I'm like, "Excuse me? What's a pour shot?" And it turned out that the agency wanted to see something on my reel that was coffee pouring into a cup, which sounds so silly, but also like, I get it. Like they're putting in a lot of money on something, and it just gives them comfort to know that whoever they're hiring has done this thing before, which a lot of times is really hard because then you think about like, well, how am I ever going to get the job if I've never done something before? So I think that's really what it came down to with Dear White People season 1. And then as far as my thoughts on it, I mean, yeah, at the time I felt like I was ready, but then, I mean, yeah, I'm sure I could have figured it out, but I think it was also helpful to kind of walk into, you know, to walk on board a ship that kind of had already been built and then kind of work from there. It's just like wrapping my head around the differences between doing a, you know, pretty small independent film and then going into a television show with you know, a much larger crew, working at a much faster pace, understanding the relationships between everybody in terms of working with that crew. Like, I think I just still had a bit of learning to do. So, yeah, and you know, maybe that's just me being optimistic about the whole thing, but I do look back on it and I'm like, maybe that was a good thing. And actually, like, now that since I had the opportunity to come back into season 2, I mean, had I never come back in, I'd probably be pretty bummed about it. But coming back in, I mean, I think it worked out great. Like, I think, as I said before, I think Jeffrey Waldron did a fantastic job of maintaining the look that we created in the movie and then applying it to the show. And then I was able to come in season 2 and kind of like, now a lot of the approach and the tools were kind of in place for me. And then that really enabled me to just go back in and, you know, just dive into the creative and work with Justin in terms of, you know, putting his vision down on a digital sensor. I guess what I'm saying is basically coming into season 2, it was just, I want to say it was like liberating because all I had to worry about again was the visuals, and I didn't have to worry so much about the nuts and bolts of figuring out how to make a brand new, very unconventional stage work. So I think, you know, it kind of like took a lot of stress off of me.
And in terms of time, you mentioned the time and the speed on a television set. How much time did you have to make Dear White People? How many days was the shoot? How long were the days? And what were you doing beforehand to get everything ready for such a film?
I want to say we might have shot that in like 19 days. It was definitely tight.
Wow.
And it was all location. I mean, that was also a high page count, but I feel like that's kind of a different animal, because for a small film like that, like, yes, we're working really fast and we're doing a lot of pages per day, but we're also kind of like just a smaller company, and we're a little bit more nimble, and we're a little bit more, I don't know, it felt like there was like a more of like an experimental spirit that I think a lot of indie films have, just kind of baked into the whole production, not just me or not just Justin or the creatives, but like the whole production. So it's like, yeah, so I guess that's a good point. I mean, page count wise, I'd definitely done high page counts before, but not with a massive crew before. So I think that's kind of the difference. But I will say this, because like going back to, I guess your point of like, well, don't you think you're ready? I will say this, that it's so funny, because after not getting the job season 1, and then after interviewing after interviewing for it again on season 2, I feel like I was just constantly hearing people tell me that I hadn't shot television, I didn't know how to shoot television, and then I wouldn't know how to shoot television. And I think it really did kind of like mess with me mentally a little bit, because then I remember, kind of like as the days grew closer and closer to our first shoot date on season 2, I was just like almost terrified. I'm like, man, like maybe I can't do this. Maybe this is just so different. I don't know how it's different, but it must be different. Everybody thinks it's different. Nobody thinks I'm ready. And then I just remember after our first day on season 2, at the end of the day, going home and just realizing like, that's exactly how every shoot ever is. It's just like a commercial. I mean, it's like the same thing. It's like I still had a key grip, holding a bounce board because we're running against the clock. And we still, like lit things the way we light things. Like nothing was really that different. So yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I think enough people tell you that you can't do something, and then it does kind of weigh on you mentally a little bit. So there was kind of a moment of awe after that first day.
Who were these people telling you couldn't do it, and why were they telling you this?
A couple Lionsgate executives that I had interviewed with, and they're the same ones I interviewed with on season 1 that then I interviewed with again on season 2. And they're very nice people, very sweet. But like I just think it's part of their style. Maybe it's just part of their interview style, where they're kind of asking you about your experience and telling you that they're concerned that you don't have any experience in television. And, so I just hear that. And then maybe it was just that. I mean, I also interviewed with Netflix. They had some concerns. I mean, everyone just wants to kind of voice, I think it's just part of the style of how it's done. Everyone wants to voice like what they are concerned about, maybe partly to kind of get that out on the table so that if anything does go wrong, they're not at fault for it necessarily. And then, yeah, I think just like that experience just had like a lot of like internalizing that happened with me mentally, in terms of me just starting to think that I couldn't do it. But, ended up that I could do it. And
certainly can.
It's a lot of fun. So I'm really glad that I ended up getting that opportunity to go back.
And you mentioned an unusual space to film in, the soundstage. For example, when I watched the film, I remember Tessa Thompson, her character, walking up the stairs, and she was saying quite a lot of dialogue to her boyfriend, the white guy she was seeing in the film. When you haven't got much space, or you've got a lot of crew members around you, what type of difficulties do you have shooting something like that?
So in terms of, you're talking about like specifically that staircase shot in the film?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so that was on location. The whole film was on location, and yeah, I mean, it was a tight space, but if I recall correctly, I think we kind of let them go a little bit silhouette-y, kind of as they rounded the staircase. There's a window behind him, if I recall.
Yeah.
And then just had a little key light just kind of tucked away to the left, probably to the left of camera, as they came up the stairs. So, I mean, it wasn't like that technical of a shot, but it was, I mean, yeah, it's one of those situations where you do need to kind of keep all unnecessary, personnel like off the set because you're in a tiny staircase. But what's funny is even though we shot the whole movie on location, I do feel like we spent so much of that film being cramped in tiny rooms. It's like, it's not that different shooting the show, because even though we're on stage, we're still, shooting on a lot of like really small sets, and people just take up space so quick. And actually it's funny because right now, going through the whole COVID-19 thing, I'm kind of, obviously what's on everyone's mind is like, well, when are we going to be coming out of this? When are we going to get back to work? And I will say, like, in terms of shooting and just production in general, it is one of those jobs where I just can't imagine it being a scenario where people aren't kind of crawling on top of each other. Like, even working on a soundstage, I feel like we are always right on top of each other. And I know that I think there's a lot of talk about like how to kind of change that. I think it's going to be a difficult thing to change. So
it certainly does seem like it will be.
Yeah, hopefully we can come up with something so that we can get back to work sooner. But it's hard for me to picture what that something would be, other than just taking more time to do things, because to me, that's the biggest part. I mean, the reason why everyone's kind of climbing on top of each other is everyone's trying to hit a very strict deadline in terms of how quickly we get a shot done. So.
And what projects do you have coming up in the future? I know COVID really messes with everyone's plans, but do you have anything still on point that you'll be shooting soon?
Well, I mean, the main thing is season 4 of Dear White People, which I'm super excited about. It's the final season. And actually, I don't know if I probably shouldn't talk too much about like the big creative change, but.
Oh, go for it. It's just me and you.
I think I won't, but I will say that there is a big creative change, which actually, like, I was kind of, I mean, a lot after season 3, everyone I know is always asking me like, are you going to do season 4? Like, do you want to do season 4? And of course, like, to me, like, the main thing is like, well, of course I want to keep working with Justin. Like, I love working with that man so much. So that's my priority. In terms of, did I want to do season 4 if there was then going to be a season 5 and a season 6 and a season 7? That was kind of like what I wasn't sure about, because it's just, at that time, I wasn't really clear on like how long the project was going to continue. But then once Justin and I had a meeting, he told me like, it's the final season. And there's quite a big change creatively, which you'll see soon enough, hopefully. Then it just became like, it really changed my perspective on everything. Because then I was like, oh, well, of course, not only do I have to be there, I really want to be there to kind of just like bookend this amazing project that I've been a part of by the time we're done with season 4, it'll be like almost maybe a decade, which will be really cool. So I'm super excited.
When you say a creative change, are you talking about on your side of things as a cinematographer, or are we talking about the story itself, or maybe an actor going or someone coming in? Or
I'll say story, and then also let's just say like kind of overall design and format. And that's as far as I'm going to get into it.
And the film itself, obviously, and the series, sorry, there's a lot of hot topics in the show. I love them. How is it on set between everybody? Because obviously it's acting, it's a story, and everybody's there to do a job. But when one thing in particular I saw when I first watched the series in series 1, when the lead actress, the biracial lady, I can't remember her name, someone sends her a text and it's got a picture of her mother and father, and the text underneath it says something along the lines of, it's a shame you're just as angry as your mom, your dad should have fucked a white woman, or something like that. What's the tone like when you're dealing with such heavy discussions in a show and in a film? What's the tone like for the cast and crew?
I mean, I think for cast, I mean, they're super, dialed into the story. So I think they're kind of setting the tone, because obviously that, that's a more serious scene. And as far as the crew, I mean, I think for the most part, the crew is really, I mean, at least the crew that I tend to work with, I mean, I can't speak for like everybody on that production. But I mean, I'm a pretty sensitive person. I feel like the people I work with generally are like pretty sensitive people. And I just think you kind of feel when you're feeling the vibes from the cast, then you act appropriately on set or conduct yourself appropriately on set. So I think like Dear White People as a unit has a really great way of kind of like when it's a more serious day, like we don't necessarily have to be told about it. It just kind of, we understand because we're reading the sides. And you know, but and we're feeling the vibes of the actors, and everyone wants to kind of create an environment where the actors can do their best work. So I think it just kind of happens naturally. It's like, and yeah.
Okay, that's good. Everyone's respectful of everyone, and especially in scenes such as that. I mean, some of it sometimes I'm watching and I'm thinking like, oh wow. I mean, it can be pretty heavy hitting, but at the same time, it can be so funny.
And I think, you know, generally speaking, the crew, like myself, really love just not only the project, but like really love the writing. I mean, it is like like there's so many laughs every day. I think it's just the show is really well written, and the people who maybe some of the people who aren't reading sides because maybe, you know, I don't know, second or, you know, second AC or whoever it is, they're really loving the new material that they're getting, and I just think it's a great atmosphere. I think, and I think largely in part because of the writing, because of the material. I think people really like working on the show.
And Justin himself, I've seen a picture of him. Is he biracial or is he black?
Justin's black.
Okay. Because some of it, I don't know, obviously I have no idea his upbringing, background or whatever, but it's written in a way that it comes, there's two voices in it that works really, really well. When I watch the series, I kind of think, I wonder where he's coming from and how did this show and film grow the way it is. Do you know why or how Justin's able to do this?
You know, I don't, but like I think like that's a big part of why I love his writing. Like, okay, so in season 2, there's like a kind of a Twitter troll character whose Twitter handle is AltIvyX, and so we kind of go through like the entire season, and this person's really saying some like nasty things, and saying nasty things to Sam, who's the main character, and you know they're just kind of come off as this kind of like evil, like kind of alt-right troll, right? So you kind of like, I think reading that, like a lot of people would assume like, okay, like I already can picture exactly, like I can already guess who this is. I can picture this guy. But then by the end of the season, you realize it's a character named Sylvia, who's a gay Latino character, who's been doing it the whole time. Who ends up being kind of like this closeted, like right-wing character. But so like to me, that was so interesting because it was just like it was certainly not what I expected. And I think it just added another layer to the material where you realize like, yeah, like this, like it's not playing into cliches, and it gave you the unexpected, and it really gets you thinking just as a human being that, you know, it's not always what you think it's going to be. So I think that answers your question, but that's a big part of what I love about Justin's writing is that I think he really like kind of takes it place to the unexpected and kind of like brings it to the next level in that way. Similar to in the film, you know, it's like you have, this is obviously a huge part of the story of the film, but Sam's boyfriend, Gabe, you know, and that whole relationship and how people around her feel about that relationship, like that to me is like that's my favorite part of the film, is the complexity there between this like biracial relationship between Sam and Gabe, and how she's kind of dealing with, you know, both sides of her identity.
I like the scene in the bedroom where he's kind of having a go at her, saying, you know, she's a troublemaker, dealing with race in certain ways. And all the others are outside knocking on the door, like saying, come on, come out. I was like, whoa, this is pretty full on, and it's written well. And, you know, I can see his point, you know, I really could.
Actually, in that scene you mentioned, there's that, and then there's that line of Gabe where where Sam says, like, "Don't say mulatto," and then Gabe says, "Mulatto, mulatto, mulatto," and then Reggie's right outside the door, and he goes, "Did somebody say mulatto?" Like, I just love, like, that is just like, it's like those tidbits in his writing that I just like love so much.
Yes, completely brilliant. But Topher, we've come to an end of our time today. But thank you so much for coming on and discussing your great work and your documentary work and Dear White People. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that one day we get to meet in person. It'd be great.
Definitely. It would be great. I was actually supposed to be in San Francisco in June, and LA and New York over the summer, but this kind of situation, COVID, has put that to an end. So once it's over, I'll definitely be over. It'd be great to catch up. That'd be brilliant.
Please do reach out. It'd be great to meet you, and thank you so much. Again, it's always very humbling when someone reaches out and wants to hear about your work. So thank you.